Hi, everyone. Welcome to our September Self-Care for Black Girls.
Welcome.
Hello. My name is Faith, and I'm a therapist here at RS Wellness.
I'm Sharea.
I'm elected. Okay. If you've watched our videos before, then you are familiar with us and kind of topics that we address. If you're new here, then welcome. Please like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for a lot more info. All right. So before we dive into today's topic, which is around sexual health, maintaining boundaries while embracing intimacy, it's important to highlight that September is Suicide Prevention Month. So with fall around the corner, I think the fall solstice is September 22nd, Sunday. Sunday. The risk of experiencing seasonal depression increases. And seasonal depression, also known as seasonal affective disorder or SAD, is a type of depression that occurs at certain times of the year, especially in the fall and winter months. So during this time, daylight savings is shorter, and people may experience symptoms of depression due to changes in light exposure, and even just changes in chemical balances within the brain. Your melatonin levels could change during this time, and you may experience persistent low mood, loss of interest in activities that you once enjoyed, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, changes in sleep patterns, weight gain, or changes in your appetite, and lastly, feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness. All of this could be tied to having suicidal ideations. So if you or someone that you know is experiencing any of these symptoms, we encourage you to seek out support either through confiding in close friends or family, using the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which is 988, and you can reach them through text or through call, depending on how anonymous you want to remain. And then also you can speak with a therapist for more consistent support or dial 911 in cases of emergencies.
Yeah. I think I have anything to add.
Okay. And of course, other awareness months in September include Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, National Recovery Month, Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, and Hispanic Heritage Month, which starts mid-September to October 15th. Anything to add for
And this is great because September is also Sexual Health Awareness Month.
Which is why we're talking about it today. I think Alexis, you brought it up in our last session. And so it felt very fitting to talk more about it today. We really want to look at the link between depression and also sexual urges to start with before we go into instant gratification and boundary setting. Okay, so first, let's just understand what sexual health means. And sexual health is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It includes not only the absence of disease, so physical wellness, but also positive, respectful, and responsible approaches to sexual relationships and behaviors. I think that's really the gist of the definition. Okay.
You're on a roll here. We gonna jump in, y'all. We are. I just don't know when. It's going good. I'm like, yeah, that's true.
And now we know that there is a link between hypersexuality and depression. And so we want to kind of tease that a bit more now. While depression is commonly associated with a decreased libido, so decreased sex drive, it can also trigger increased sexual urges for some people due to factors like emotional coping, impulsivity, hormonal imbalances, and a need for validation. So we're going to go into these more specifically now. First is the coping mechanism. So having sex or just having these increased sexual urges is a form of escapism, and can help to relieve those feelings of sadness, emptiness, or hopelessness. There's a risk here where engaging in sexual activity can stimulate pleasure-related brain chemicals like dopamine and endorphins and offer that brief release of depressive symptoms.
Because it feels good, right? So when something feels good and those things are food, sex, other things that can give you that same feeling of just being healthy or feeling healthy, especially in the moment, it seems like why not keep doing it? It works, right? And that's The issue is that you become more risky or take higher risk because you're trying to get to that same level of brain chemical
Mhm.
that might need to be worked on around depression.
Mhm. Yeah, really, it's almost like self-medicating, where you're not really addressing the underlying issues, you're kind of just using it to get by.
And it's looked at sort of like what Sharea said with food, it's looked at this natural thing. Like,
Yeah,
so it's not substance use, because some people say, oh, well, that's not natural, but when you think of sex, you think of, oh, well, this is a natural need, so why not? Like, this is something good for me. But yeah, definitely be used as a coping skill.
Mhm. And then like Sharia mentioned with being impulsive or taking a lot of risks or engaging in risky behaviors, some people may seek a thrill when it comes to engaging in sexual activities. And this can also be used to really channel the emotional numbness, which can come with depression. Okay. Now, of course, the connection is also, or could be because of medication side effects, where certain medications used to treat depression, like antidepressants, can either decrease or in rare cases increase your sexual desires. So medications like Wellbutrin are known for having stimulating effects, which can enhance your libido for some people. And then lastly, we have low self-esteem and validation, where people who experience depression often feel low self-esteem or feelings of worthlessness.
Mhm.
And engaging in sexual activity might provide them with the temporary validation, affection, or attention, which can make them feel desired or valued.
So it's that external validation that you're looking for. And so now it becomes a physical act that you're taking or willing to take in order to get that external validation every single time. And so sometimes what I see with clients is that in the moment that works. And then later on, there's shame and guilt that comes on as a result of it not really being a long-term response to depression, right? It's a momentary gratification. I know we're gonna get into that, but it really is about like what's gonna be the consequence of that action later, if it really is just a coping mechanism for this very moment.
And in talking about sexual health, it's also important to consider our identities as Black women and what sexual health means and the repercussions of it, even as Black women. So firstly, we want to talk about ways to maintain sexual health and also setting boundaries to really protect ourselves from these unique societal, cultural, and historical challenges that we face. Okay, first is protection against health disparities, where Black women are more likely to face health disparities in areas such as sexually transmitted infections or STIs, including higher rates of HIV and reproductive issues like fibroids. Prioritizing our sexual health through regular screenings, contraception, and safe sex practices can help to mitigate these risks.
And being able to understand those, right?
Yeah.
Because I think part of what I learned in my time of working with different age women is that we can talk about it, but some of them just don't know how to advocate for themselves. And in some cases, don't know how to use contraceptions, don't know how to do, like, so sometimes when we are unaware of knowing how to bring it into the conversation, how to not based off of age, it sometimes feels like this shameful act that you have to do. Like, so there's these things that we're giving as suggestions, but then if you know you need additional support to learn how to communicate it, to learn how to actually do it, there's a lot of different agencies that specifically work with sexual health in this area. And then if not, you hopefully can connect with a good therapist who's willing to also be comfortable enough to bring it into a setting. Because I can recall some of my younger clients at the time where they were sexually active coming in and being afraid to bring it to their mother or bring it to their parents. And just like, yeah, I'm doing it either way.
Right.
And now they have no idea how to use protection. And so the conversation becomes, where can you learn it? Where can I refer you to? And in some cases, I did group programs where we would literally just have 1 week was related to sexual health. And sometimes that meant how to use a condom.
Right.
And like I said,
Or
even
use protection, because it wasn't always a male condom.
when we talk about like ageism and sexuality, even we see in older adults, specifically senior living facilities or nursing homes, the STI rates are through the roof.
Yes.
Because of the miseducation that we all receive, that condoms are just for preventing birth. And then you're thinking, well, I can't have any more kids, so we ain't got nothing to worry about, Earl. And it's like,
Roll
no,
out here doing work.
yeah.
That's the.
Right, and correct, like, Earl is doing the thing, or maybe Earletta is out here doing the stuff, and now,
Yeah,
Carl got something.
why not?
Carl got something, he burning a little bit, so just around that educating that sexual health is important at all ages.
Mhm.
From elementary school up until the grave. I always say from the womb to the tomb, like
Mhm.
being educated, especially around sexual health. We have bodies, we have these sexual urges or sexual behaviors or natures, and it's important to be educated on them. So,
And proper screening at all ages,
Mhm.
because what are you doing to make sure you're screening according to the age that you are
right,
and your gender, right?
Mhm.
Because then there's certain things that you need to be doing as you're
Mhm.
developing, as well as when you get a certain age, you should
Yeah.
also be still checking in.
Mhm.
And you're checking in differently, but you are checking in
Right.
different ways. So those screenings are also just like contraceptions. It's important to have the conversation, to talk about those things, and to actually, when you don't know, be okay to ask the question.
Yeah. And I find that a lot with some of the people that I work with around the medical field, like you said, health disparities within the medical field, either not receiving adequate answers around things like fibroids, PCOS, endometriosis, things, even when pregnancy and around like prenatal care and postnatal care, trying to get this information, either not receiving it or receiving misinformation, false information, trying to, maybe you did advocate for yourself, or you're saying this is what's going on for me, and it's just overlooked, or you're just blanketed, like, oh, it's this because you're Black and overweight and 35. So this is your issue. And it's like, it's not though, like,
Yeah.
so that's all a part of health. And like Sharea said, sometimes advocating for yourself, even when you're older, and if you can advocate for yourself in different areas, when it comes to our sexual health, which is very sensitive for a lot of people, a sensitive topic, to be able to voice and not take that first answer for face value, but to say, okay, I need more information, or I need more help. I don't know, or I don't think I'm receiving the right kind of service. That can be difficult.
Absolutely.
And when you think about it, compounded with, I'm already in a depressive state, like I can't imagine how difficult that is for people, but it's real. People are dealing with that every day.
Yeah. That's why it's always, when we think about self-advocacy, it goes beyond just the medical space, where even within your
Absolutely.
friend groups, like
Yes.
it's important to have these conversations and be open about your practices, your questions, to really take away the shame from a lot of it. Even something like we were talking about, I think some days ago, about discharge. And how a lot of young girls have these misconceptions around discharge that lead them to engage in really unhealthy behaviors, like wearing penny liners every single day and not really giving yourself space. That in itself is sexual health, and building awareness around those things and how to protect you even further.
And being comfortable with having those conversations, because as friend groups, if nothing else, they should be, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that we're having the right conversations and we're not having more stigma-based conversations or shame-based conversations. The other thing is, I find that a lot of people, even in their friend groups, don't bring the full story.
Yeah.
And so as a result, people can't always help or assist. And I feel like one of the things as I'm getting older, is that with a few of my girlfriends, we bring it to each other exactly as it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is a lot.
Yeah.
And it'll be like, oh, you're doing that? Okay, do you, baby? But here's what I need you to do while you're doing you.
Right.
Because in this world we live in, there's consequences to your actions that might be health related, or might be physical or consent. Like there's things that you need to be up, but even if it's just, even within your friend group, even if it's just smaller circle within that group, right? You may not be able to do it with everyone, but being able to get to that point where you can actually just say, I don't feel judged and I feel loved. We're gonna have to have a real conversation. I mean, with sexual health specifically, it's always an area for Black women that is uncomfortable if we have different realities around sexual orientation, sexual expression. If we have any of those differences, then it becomes this like, I can only relate to. When in reality, we should be making a space for everyone to relate to each other, even if it's not the walk we have.
Yeah.
Like, that bothers me, because I'm like, all of my friends, but some of them can't handle it either.
Yeah.
They don't, like, Why you keeping all of that? You're gonna be sick,
Right.
you know? Like,
Yeah,
but, okay, get off my box.
but I think what we're talking about is very relevant, even for this next one around cultural norms and stigmas,
Mhm.
where some cultural norms can contribute to the silencing around sex and sexual health, leaving
Mhm.
Black women without information or confidence to make empowered decisions. So, yes, so talking about it and even just boundary setting can help us through these cultural stigmas and even just promote our well-being.
Mhm.
And then with that also is hypersexualization of Black women,
Mhm.
which we see not only in our day-to-day lives, but also in the media,
Mhm.
where Black girls from a very young age are hyper-policed about what they're wearing. They're being told that how they dress means that they're being loose or kind of speaks more, right? Like being fast, or it's about their character. And these things are placed on us without even our understanding of what these are.
Mhm.
Before you know what sex is, you're being told that you can't dress a certain way or you can't look or,
Or she thinks she cute.
right?
Right, it sounds like something so simple, but what you're doing is you're perpetuating the same stereotypes around what historically, if we would just throw it in for where it comes from, historically, what racism is and enslavement. But historically, one of the ways that they would control us would give us this quote unquote, and this is a religious term, but it's also something that most Black folk will know regardless of your religion, is that Jezebel spirit.
Mhm.
Right, and so what happens is in order to control, you start to actually make the person who is actually being harmed and hurt the actual fault of the perpetration that people are doing on them. So the Jezebel spirit or quote unquote became like this historical thing that looks at why Black women are sexualized, but it really is because you were raping us. It's because you were stealing us from our families, right? And so some of those conversations now become how we in our homes reinforce the shame,
Mhm.
right? And as we reinforce the shame, most of us don't want to communicate what we're dealing with. And it also just creates a safer place for perpetrators and
Mhm.
violators
Absolutely.
to harm our daughters even more
Yeah.
in every single generation. And it still saddens me that with all that we have going and with so much access and so much education, it's still very active in most of our Black homes.
Yeah.
Where Black girls are very early on told things that they would never say to their Black sons. And that becomes more about judgment of who they're gonna be as a result of, oh, you think you're pretty, you think, like,
Right.
I think I'm pretty, I'm 4.
Right.
Right.
And so, and should not think I'm pretty, right?
About that, that's a whole nother issue, right? Like,
Cute.
should not have confidence, right?
Right,
Should not
yeah.
believe in myself, but okay, I'm supposed to be ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I'm ashamed later on and somebody does or says something to me, I can't have a voice. Yeah.
Or if I'm ashamed that I don't know something, or it was always sexualized or it was gendered that male counterparts should know. They should know, or they should be the ones to introduce contraception into the sexual experience, or they should be the ones to do this. And then when it doesn't happen, again, like they were saying about that boundary, you not feeling like you have the right to say, well, hold on, I don't feel comfortable with not using protection, but he didn't whip out protection, so.
Now we're just taking an action.
Yeah.
That puts us both at risk. And since we're talking Black women's sexual health, puts us at risk, right? Because then that becomes something that we are not able to go talk about, or something comes wrong with us, because more likely than not, we're the ones that's gonna find out, because it's higher, like, go find out something's wrong because of discharge issues, all the other things, and they still gonna be running around doing God knows what.
And then they'll turn it on you and say,
Yeah, like, what are you doing? So it's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
And then you're considered hypersexual when sometimes you really weren't.
Right.
You just took an act that did not have a full understanding on how to keep yourself safe.
And like you said, even with the policing of bodies at a young age, when we talk about culture, some of the things that are sure tell signs that someone is sexually active, like a fat, or your butt got a little bigger overnight. So you must be getting something in there. Or your chest got a little bigger. Who you letting suck on those?
So
like,
puberty?
Yeah, like, so
I gotta be ashamed of puberty too.
How we speak to young Black girls
It's very different.
Is very different than how we speak to any other demographic around their body, like their body and their sexual behavior, which is not, there's no correlation there.
It really isn't.
I fully forgot about that. I remember in middle school, they would like check your thigh gaps, like, oh, I know you're, I'm like, no, not.
And like, that's the way my body shapes, because I might have different curves.
We
I might
said
have-
puberty, your
puberty,
hips spread, like,
fitting.
so.
And I'm like, no.
So this natural act of just growing up is causing you to think that I'm out here having sex. And even if I were, that should not be an indicator
Right.
of if I'm good or bad.
Completely. Yeah, so there is a lot
Forgot
of
about that
learning
one
to
too.
do.
Like, yeah, that was like, who came up with that one? Like, oh, you got hips now.
Right, I guess
Okay.
because you're spreading them and it's like, it makes your bone structured.
I'm turning older. How about
I've never
that?
heard of sex changing your bone structure, but if y'all can get your bone structures changed,
Maybe.
I ain't yucking you young. It's your
I know
business.
that's right.
I've never.
Right.
And nobody else really said it. They just make believe, all the other things we talked about, being fast, being too grown, like all of those things are just shamers.
Yeah.
Like,
Completely.
And you think about the weight that that really carries with someone,
yes, around
even,
their esteem.
yeah, around like their self-esteem, because then you feel like I can't be me, where you start then saying, well, like, I would like to wear a shirt, but I can't because now I'm gonna attract all of this unwanted attention, or I'm gonna give off the wrong message to someone. And I can't do that. I can't send out these messages to people that I'm open for business.
I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna say it also brings out the opposite, where it's like, now I'm gonna be resistant, rebellion, and think that owning sexuality and sexual freedom becomes hypersexual.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm gonna look like I do have sex, I'm gonna look like, I'm like, look at the stereotypes and how it then reinforces the negatives about me. So for me to feel like I'm owning it, I'm gonna try to own it in a way that is exploiting us in some senses.
Yeah, and then,
Right, so we don't wanna hear that, because sometimes it's like, oh, this is our sexual freedom.
right.
But I just wanna say that sometimes your sexual freedom is really confused with the abuse that you have historically had to deal with. Now, I'm not saying sexual abuse, because that's not the only
Right.
form of oppression around sex, right? But what I am saying is that sometimes the acts that we take what looks like sexual liberation
Oh, yeah.
are really still promoting the sexual hyperization that people have given us around being quote unquote the Jezebel.
Like sexy red.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and then sexuality.
I was trying not to call
No.
I'm trying
Yeah.
to stay legit.
Yeah, and sexuality is actually called sexualization. Like, that's a circle of sexuality, it's sexualization, and it is the use and manipulation of either sexual behaviors or your body to manipulate other people. And it's something that not everyone can sit with, because within that field, we talk about seduction, we talk about flirting, we talk about things, how you maneuver or how you try to control someone with your sexiness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And sometimes that doesn't always come from a place of freedom.
Right.
Especially when we go back to the whole validation thing.
Yes.
And even those feelings of loneliness and isolation, where if I'm told as a Black girl that my only form of beauty is in my sexuality, is in my hips, I'm going to try to leverage that as a way of receiving love. And when it becomes unhealthy, is people are loving you for your body, but not for who you are. And you see that as your sole, I guess, reason or purpose or identity, it becomes dangerous.
It's easy to get blurred.
Yeah.
And it's easy for it to look like one thing and it to be a totally different controlling thing. And I think it saddens me, because it's hard to break,
Yeah.
because sometimes we can't undo what people believe about us, right? Like, whether we like that or not, it's the truth. Now, I am also a believer that regardless of what you believe about me, you don't have a right to harm or hurt me.
Right.
And I still have the freedoms to make these decisions based off of whatever has a conditioned or acculturated me. You don't get a right to then on the outside tell me or shame me as a result.
Yeah.
However, I do think we need to understand that even those things come from places.
Yeah. And so part of that also is just setting more boundaries and really being aware of situations and environments that can pose harm, and avoiding those as a way of maintaining our sexual health and even just protecting our well-being. Next, we talk about consent and communication, where having clearly defined sexual boundaries can help to promote open communication and mutual respect in relationships. So for Black women who may often feel overlooked or disrespected in society, it's especially important to set these boundaries and communicate with consent. as a way of ensuring that you are heard, respected, and treated as an equal partner in your relationships.
I mean, amen to that. I don't, nothing to say yes.
Yeah.
Like consent is a hard one for people. Sometimes we don't know consent, and it goes back to our experiences. And it goes back to sometimes losing our voices very early on. And so sometimes consent may be blurred. And so I also think maybe even educating ourselves and our relationships with our friends around how we talk about consent being more than just the word yes.
Yes.
Like, does your body respond? Do you want to be present? Do you feel like you're interested in this? Regardless of if it's same sex or opposite sex, you should be aroused in a way that's about consent, both physically and mentally.
Right.
And so I think having those honest conversations that is more than just a word,
Right.
and it's more than just, hey, yes, I want to have sex. It's also, is my body responding in a way that this is pleasurable for me and enjoyable for me and the other person? Because
Right.
sometimes I'm also a perpetrator of not making sure that I'm not also a perpetrator of taking someone else's consent.
Right, right. And now, of course, you've kind of touched on this about the generational piece, but educating yourself on boundary setting and even just maintaining healthy sexual relationships is important for breaking generational cycles. So when Black women prioritize their sexual health and assert their boundaries, they serve as role models for younger generations. And this can help to break those cycles of silencing around sexual health, reduce the stigma around sexual abuse and harm, and also promote open conversations about consent, autonomy, and well-being.
In other words, it is our responsibility, even as we grow older, to still make sure we create safe spaces for each other and for our younger girls as well. Because what I fear is that we have no one to talk to, and then when we're talking to ourselves, meaning our peer groups, they have yet to get the education to help and support. And so you're getting all this false information and just spreading it around, right? And so to me, I feel like we as older Black women, that's how I consider that myself now, should be less judgmental, should be opening up our hearts to a different way of looking and still give education. And if we don't have it, we need to go get it ourselves, right? Because I also think we can't just assume that older women know what they're talking about.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Because I always listen to some of them, I'm like,
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Well, not telling my daughter that, like,
Right.
you know, because you're educated according to your hurt and ignorance.
Right.
And so I think it's fair to say that we need to be able to have the conversations where we can challenge some of the misinformation, even with our older women.
Yeah.
And it should be okay for younger women to do that.
Yeah.
Right? You ain't right just because you older. Right?
Right.
No, you're not. Just louder
You just louder, yeah.
and older and older.
Yeah, the push for a comprehensive sex education is so much more than what some people think it is, which is, oh, you just want to tell people how to do stuff, where that's like sexual mechanics. And it's like, no, sexual health is a part of sex education, knowing about hygiene, knowing
Yes.
about intimacy, knowing about your identity, your expression, which are two different things, knowing about your sexual orientation, which is a completely different thing, knowing about different kinks that you may be into or that you may want to explore. And like Sharea said, like, if you don't have a friend group where you could be like, such and such, then you go out and you open yourself up to a world of like, who knows what.
Yeah.
TikTok, I mean, and TikTok can be great for forming communities, and so can a lot of other social platforms. However, like Sharea said, there's a lot of people coming over off of there on lived experience and not education, which can be very harmful, especially when you feel like I'm dealing with this alone, or I'm living with this in secret or in shame, so I'm not talking about it. And those are also spaces where a lot of harm can be done, because then I feel shame because I was even into this. Now I feel shame that this thing happened to me, or something happened to me while I was seeking this thing out. So I'm not saying anything. I mean, you deal with that alone. And that is very real for a lot of Black women.
I was gonna add to, which you kind of touched on it just now about social media, where thankfully, and sometimes unfortunately, we live in a day and age where there's so much information that's out there.
Yeah.
You can literally go on TikTok and find a video about something that you are wondering about.
TikTok is the #1 search engine over Google now.
Yeah,
I just
because-
saw that. Yeah.
Okay, I've been using it more people, like, it has.
People will go to TikTok over Google, so it's no longer Google me, baby, it's TikTok me,
Yeah,
baby.
and it's really because if you use it, and I see you, but if you use it in the right way, it can be so beneficial.
Mhm.
There's so much information there. There are professionals that are on there. Even before TikTok, I used to watch a sexologist on YouTube, like I told you guys. And that was even before engaging in sexual acts or even knowing as much about sex with my friends. I got to learn from that sexologist, hear personal stories, but also just the research behind things. And I was a lot more informed going into it. And I think TikTok is also offering that for people where you can learn a lot more than you normally would. And so it's really helpful in that way. And I encourage you, if you are watching this and you are on the younger side, to use it in that way. Now, also with the precaution of being
It's like
guided.
everything is a good and a
Exactly.
bad, anything can be misused.
Mhm.
Like being very guided and intentional about who you're listening to and where they're coming from.
Right.
What their expertise is. Is it a fellow 12-year-old giving you crazy advice to click off? If it's an older person, or even someone who is still your age, but just is more informed and knows
Absolutely,
more.
because that might be their area of expertise, that might be experience area, where they've been able to balance between life experience and educating themselves on
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Like, you do have to curate the environment of learning that is actually going to give you a successful experience.
Yeah.
Just like everything else, my fear, is that most people aren't doing that.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's what I'm saying with that, with everything, and again, this is the study to show thyself approved, like, do your own research. So like, I use TikTok more now, because I like seeing people, and it's shorter than YouTube, so I don't have to watch like this 40-minute video and click through it. It's like, you give me, I know it's only gonna be 10 minutes max, and I can get what I need. But then going to, like, checking your references, like, where are your receipts? Like, you're telling me this, but where are your receipts? Because if you don't have any, that is your lived experience, that is your truth, but that doesn't mean that it is true.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, we're perfectly going into the tips, the next portion, which is tips for prioritizing sexual health. And we've kind of already spoken about this, but the first is having comprehensive sexual health knowledge. This means staying informed about sexually transmitted infections, contraceptive methods, and reproductive health. Also, understanding consent and communication, where these healthy relationships are really built on mutual consent and open communication. Understanding your boundaries and also respecting your partner's decisions become really important. And lastly, understanding the emotional implications of sex and intimacy, where it can affect your mental health, body image, and even just your relationship dynamics.
Yep.
Yeah, all of that.
Next is challenging instant gratification.
Ooh,
The big one, where
just talked about the short attention span.
Hard.
Well, we about to tell y'all to make sure you don't.
right.
That's so,
Yeah.
but it's real.
Yeah.
Like, the reality is that instant gratification comes from somewhere, which is also why short videos are better in this time than ever, because most people can't handle it with a long term.
Yeah.
But instant gratification can be a violation of your health. It can also cause other issues like not knowing what to do in what scenario. Because although I always tell people, I'm like, yeah, one sexual act is not really taking as long as you think it is. However, the consequence of that act could take the rest of your life. Right? And so you have to be really mindful of that instant gratification, knowing where it's coming from, like what we talked about earlier. And I'm sorry if I'm summing up, let you go.
No, that's perfect.
Like, knowing where it comes from is gonna be extremely important, but then also finding other ways to make sure that you're not trying to do instant gratification that can be harmful to you. Right? Not every instant gratification is wrong when it comes to sexual health and sexual acts. It's knowing that that's what you want to participate in and making sure you're prepared for those acts and sexual activities to make sure it's safe, even if it's instant gratification. But knowing where it's coming from and why you need to do that is also equally important, because if you need to really resolve depression, it doesn't matter how often or how many times you actually have that sexual gratification, it's not going to change the core issue that you're dealing with.
Sharea said it perfectly. So the first tip is practicing mindfulness and self-awareness. So really identifying the triggers for the urge, whether it's stress, boredom, loneliness, depression. This can really help you to manage those situations more effectively. And even just being mindful of the emotions behind the urges. That's really the first step to managing instant gratification.
And I think this is really good when you say mindfulness, but also CBT a little bit, right? Where it's like you have to be able to identify that urge and where it's coming from to be able to really respond to it in a way that's healthy. Because I'm thinking when you said one of them, I was like, sometimes I use it for that. But I'm also prepared for using it for that, right? So it's not about being bored, right? That wasn't bored, it was something else you said.
Stress, boredom, loneliness, or depression.
Oh, maybe it was bored. The other ones are not what I'm using it for. So sometimes if I'm bored, I'm like, oh, good sex will be good right now, right? But I'm prepared already with knowing what I want, knowing how to make sure I'm initiating and making sure it's consensual with the other person. Like being prepared, even though it might be an urge from that area.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if it's depression, then I have a different conversation with myself because I know personally that's not going to be a long-term response.
That's when you have the post clarity and you're just like, what was the point of this?
Exactly. It's like, yeah, that's still sad.
Yeah. Now you're probably crying.
Now I'm sad and I'm crying, right? And I want this, like to get I want a boy to leave. Like, look, it really wasn't about you. Yeah. I barely like you.
And it's interesting because that's even within the lens of like a random person, but imagine with your partner,
Yeah,
where you can still crave that instant gratification and you still feel that same like,
this is what I wanted.
yeah, like, this didn't really help.
It didn't change what you're dealing with, right?
The next is waiting the urge out, which is the hard part for some people, where it's important to set a time, such as 10 to 15 minutes, and distract yourself with another activity like taking a walk, reading, or engaging in a hobby. And this delay allows the intensity of the urge to pass and just to help you build self-discipline.
And self-awareness, right?
and
Because then that also means that you're acknowledging that where that urge is really coming from has nothing to do with the act. Which means it brings more awareness for when it keeps coming up and you can even find the trigger later on.
Exactly. Because if it is boredom, for example, and you do another activity and then the urge is decreased, then you know, okay,
Yeah,
really
it just
need
is something else.
Exactly. Yeah. And then of course, I mean, this part I'm a bit in between because it can increase shame and guilt, but I do think it's important to remind yourself of the long-term consequences of instant gratification when it's more risky, such as emotional dissatisfaction, STIs, or relationship strain.
Yeah, that is a little risky.
Yeah.
Right, because I think it brings more shame or guilt. However, I also hear why it's also something to think about when we think about there is a consequence no matter we like it or not, right? And it's not about just the act of shame or guilt, but the act of realizing the consequence that may be coming from taking these actions based off of the urge.
You like infidelity. If you have if your partner is away or you're in a long distance relationship and you're like, I'm feeling horny now. And you just act on that.
Yeah.
There's consequences to that. Like,
yeah.
Facts. There you have it.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah.
And then another tip too is channeling your energy into other activities. So engaging in physical activity also allows you to release endorphins, which can help to reduce stress and elevate mood. And even pursuing hobbies or creative outlets.
I laugh because I'm like, well, I'll take that run real quick. I'm sorry. I'm just being truthful, right? Because some of it's like, yeah,
but it's unrealistic, yeah.
It's okay if it's a healthy decision to make that you want to have sex in this moment, as long as it's not about the negative energy or coming from that source.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, yeah, are we shaming sex?
See, all of these are within the caveat of if it's risky.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe what I'm thinking. I gotta remember when it's risky or it's a decision that is not matching your sexual health intention.
Exactly.
Got you. And so now remember that.
Yeah, that caveat is there for all of these.
Yeah, because I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna just go ahead and get it. If he's down,
Yeah,
I'm down. Let's
increase
go
my
get
heart
it.
rate.
I mean, because it's exercise, I get a couple calories for it.
Mhm.
I'm like,
She said, that's the endorphin that I want.
in that moment. But that also becomes the difference, right? It's,
Yeah.
that's the one I want
Mhm.
versus am I doing it because it's substituting or kind of
Yeah.
replacing or trying to dismiss whatever I really need to deal with.
Mhm.
So I think that is true when it's risky and that caveat has to be there.
Mhm.
We're not saying don't enjoy sex, don't enjoy
Right.
the intimacy that you might get from it, but know where the urge is actually coming from and if it's gonna meet the actual true core need or issue.
Completely.
Somebody moving out there.
Right. Loud.
Y'all may not hear it, but we do. We like, wait.
Mhm.
And I'm next to the door, so I'm like, wait a second. Is that door locked?
But even in it being risky and thinking about like, if, to be aware that these things, if you are the recipient of someone who maybe is experiencing these risky, impulsive,
Yeah,
instant
like
gratification
urges.
needs, because then what that can also do for you, whether it's if you're also in an intimate relationship with this person, or if it was just a sexual experience with this person, what that can also do and mean for you. So it's important to also be aware, maybe you don't deal with some of these issues, but to also know what it may look like. Because what if the partner that you are engaging with is experiencing some of these things,
So
to be
true.
able to also set some boundaries or have some conversations that are needed around this as well.
No, we just hit one. The next
So
one.
true.
Oh, I don't know if that's the next one, but that was
Yeah.
open boundary. You literally hit it.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect.
Because that is true, like, you have to have the discussions, which is why I laughed about it, because I'm like, yeah, like, sometimes you're gonna do it when you're
Mhm.
bored. But you already know that this might be because we're bored, but it is not gonna break what's going on in our relationship, it's not gonna strain it, right? Now, other times, if you're bored and it starts to become a violation of that person's
Right.
space, their ability to, like, you have to be able to say, am I violating myself or others?
Right,
And that's hard because people have low self-awareness in this area,
right.
but that's another.
I'm saying,
story.
and being aware of it, because I don't want this to be a message that is for people who may be single or people who are just dating, but there are
Mhm.
people who are also in exclusive and long relationships where marriages where this is a very real thing, where one person ends up feeling like a receptacle because I mean, you use me when you're bored, you use me when you're frustrated, you use me as like your Benadryl and your NyQuil
And that's the
and your
thing, like,
cigarette
that doesn't
and
feel good. to-
Alcohol.
And I don't think anyone that would feel good too,
Mhm.
right? Because then now that's just using the person.
Mhm.
Like, and if it's not, to me, that's no longer consensual either.
Yeah.
Like, that's bordering on forcing a person to have to be your everything in this area.
And even that going into, like you said, going into all of those areas that we covered, consent and shame, because then if I
Don't do it.
deny
Then I'm ashamed.
my partner, then
Yeah.
I shamed them for being a sexual being,
Or I'm
or
not being a good.
I'm not
partner.
being a
Absolutely.
good wife or a good partner. And so like being aware, be like, I don't think you want me.
Mhm. I think you want my body.
Which I feel like we gonna have to do the opposite of this one, where sex health is also like the intimacy and pleasure of like, embracing it too, because I'm like, well, my husband just bought me
Yeah.
some stuff and like, I want you to wear it. I'm like,
Yeah, sometimes
I
you
wear
wear
it. But okay, let's try.
I think
Great, so you gotta be able to balance, because some of this is like that border, I just feel like.
right,
we're on the
noticing
edge.
when it's and usually you can tell it's unhealthy if it's one-sided.
Mhm.
There
Like
you
it's
go.
different if, like,
That's
okay,
true.
my husband
There
bought me
you go.
this and I wanna wear this.
Mhm.
And if he's just constantly throwing me
Or
fishnets,
this.
like throwing me fishnets, like, and I want you in this in the middle of the day when I come home because I need that for my lunch dessert. Like
Yeah.
it's a difference saying I want your lunch dessert. There's a difference. I think like
Absolutely.
knowing that what we're discussing today is more so on the unhealthy side.
And that's what I
Because
think.
there's
maybe
definitely
that can-
a great health
Yeah.
popping.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll do one
Pleasure.
on that too, where it's like the pleasure of sex.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
And you know that's
the
my
pleasure.
expertise.
I was gonna say, you're gonna lead that. You will lead that conversation.
Yeah,
You
like
could be
the
in
pleasure
this
of
scene.
Black women receiving and giving and sharing in their
Yeah.
sexual.
So important.
Sexual expression.
So
And
important.
knowing what you like, right?
Mhm.
Because I do think some of it has been so shamed in our mind that this could seem like we're shaming too.
Mhm.
And that's what I don't want it to happen,
Mhm.
because I'm like, no, there's on the other side of that. Is there gonna be a need to have sex sometimes when you just feel bored, but you're together and y'all like each other
Mhm.
like that? You know what I mean? Like, or that's what y'all decide in your relationship
Mhm.
or connection, because it's not always a relationship,
Right.
right? And that being okay too, right? So I think being able to have that conversation will help too.
Mhm.
Cause I'm just over here like, wait.
No, it's always the caveat. It's always
And I
the
think that
caveat.
unhealthy part is where we know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and I definitely feel like for Black women especially, it can always border on that unhealthy side. Because
Yeah.
someone is trying to control us,
Mhm.
even if it's not their, I would say they actually intent.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like the lack of knowing that you're manipulating us or being manipulated.
Mhm. And it's like you receive that cultural
Yeah,
stigma of being the most hypersexualized, non-sexual being,
yeah.
which doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
Like,
I know that's right.
I'm
No,
like,
get the
and
delete.
that is the Black woman. If you think about the complaints that a lot of people get, that a lot of Black women receive, you're not freaky enough, your libido isn't high enough, you don't want to do things, you're a pillow princess. Like all of these things that are talked about within sexual behavior, yet we're so sexual.
Yeah, it's against the stereotype of us, right? It's like, but that also is a real conversation to have just in that
Yeah.
part, where it's
Yeah.
like, we start to convince ourselves that if we do those things, then on the other side of that is that something's wrong with us,
Mhm.
and it's not.
Mhm. Now, for the sake of time, I'm gonna bring through the rest. And
We got
then,
on a tangent.
yeah, but it's a necessary conversation nonetheless. So if we're thinking about tips for sexual health, the next few tips are openly discussing your boundaries, as Alexa said. Just your boundaries, your desires, and your emotional needs with your partner. And this is both in a committed relationship and just with someone that you're with casually. Also reducing exposure to sexual content if it's not what you want, as always. Like we said, defining your personal values, so really understanding what sex means to you,
Yeah,
what relationships mean to you, how you understand well-being, and engaging in behaviors that align with those values.
that's a good one.
Seeking support and accountability, like we said before, either talking to a therapist or a counselor to
Or a sex
understand,
therapist,
right? Or a sex
right? Like
therapist.
knowing that that's what they talk about, and you don't have to be worried about being shamed for anything.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Right? And then even in smaller spaces, like with your friends, if your mom is someone that you can confide in, speaking to your mom or an elder who is more understanding, just really reaching out or considering the different kinds of resources that are available for you. And then lastly, practicing self-compassion. So it's important to avoid harsh self-judgments if you struggle with impulses. It's important to acknowledge that managing instant gratification is a process and setbacks can also happen. So be kind to yourself and focus on that gradual progress. And also celebrate the small wins. So positive reinforcement really helps to build confidence in your ability to manage your desires effectively. That's it.
All right.
Any tips that we missed or you guys think is important to add?
I think those are a good list, and we all know that they are for when it's a negative or an unhealthy or maladaptive way of functioning.
Completely. So now for our wrap up, for Black women, maintaining sexual health and setting clear boundaries are not only about protecting your physical health, but also about reclaiming your autonomy, challenging these societal norms, and fostering self-respect and empowerment. These practices are essential for breaking cycles of inequality, promoting emotional well-being, and ensuring that Black women have full control over their bodies, desires, and relationships.
Yeah.
So now we can go into our wellness tips.
Drink your water, sis. Get your body moving 30 minutes a day. Make sure we don't tell you what to do, just do something. I was thinking the other day, I need to do a little bit of more dancing. It's been a minute. But just making sure that you are moving, and especially as we talked about earlier, as the season is starting to change, movement is going to be extremely important. And as much as possible, getting that vitamin D and that sun is going to be helpful. Make sure you balance your diet and what you're putting into it. So incorporating fruits and vegetables, especially again, as we get ready to go into the seasonal depression stage, we want to try to combat and be prepared and to really start doing things that can help us. even as it may still happen because it's a natural part of the year. Make sure you're finding time for meditation and mindfulness and just even your whole spiritual self. Depending on how you define that, it could be praying, meditation, mindfulness, taking walks, hiking, a lot of different ways to connect with your higher self and your higher power. And then finding joy, make sure that every single day you are looking to embrace the small wins and embrace the small great victories about yourself and others, and that is going to make you feel good about all kinds of things. Get your rest and show yourself some self-compassion.
Yeah. And now we can look at what are we grateful for? Anyone can go first.
I am grateful for friends that don't judge.
For you.
Yeah, I'm grateful for community, for sure. And I'm also grateful for education
Absolutely.
and the access and the privilege to be able to access, because depending on where you're watching around the world, you may not even have access to some information.
Yeah. Yeah. I think similar. I'm grateful for connections like friendships, support systems, support systems, and just people who can help provide you when you're feeling down.
On that note, we're going to skip our affirmations, but know that you are well, you are taking care of yourselves. Positive affirmations, I will put some in the down in the bottom just for y'all to have, y'all. I'll cut and paste a few. For October, we're looking at substance abuse for Black women. All right, and
I think the
how to settle in relationships, see.
That's
your
for
whole-
another.
Okay.
Another.
My bad. Thought that was what I was reading. But on that note, y'all take good care of yourselves. I hope that if you have anything that you'd like to add, you drop it in the comments. Please make sure to be kind to each other and support each other as we all attempt to make sure we take care of our sexual health as Black women.
All right, take care, y'all.
Be well.
See ya.